Hi, welcome to this second day of our conference. I know everybody must have been enjoying the music. Unfortunately, we have to get into the business of the day. My name is Leander Reiters. I am from the National Cleaner Production Centre, South Africa. Welcome to the session on circular economy and life cycle management. We have a very exciting lineup, if I may call it that. But we have some great speakers today that will share with us their views and also the work that they've been doing in terms of circular economy and how it cuts across resource efficiency and the activities of the National Cleaner Production Centre. We have, of course, over the years, worked with a number of stakeholders on circular economy activities. Our core focus and our core function is, of course, as we've heard this morning, to support industry through resource efficiency methodologies. And of course, as we see the growth of the circular economy movement and practices that is growing across the globe, South Africa is also one of the important parts of the continent and locations in the continent where circular economy can make a real impact in sustainability. So we have a great, like I said, a great lineup of speakers today. We have also a number of participants online, and one of our speakers will also be doing his presentation online. But firstly, I would like to just ask if we don't have a big group in the room today. So I know that we will have someone from the NCPC team sitting in and supporting here. But please do keep questions handy. We will have a panel discussion at the end of the day, at the end of today's session. So we will have a circular economy session, presentations, speakers talking on circular economy before lunch. And after lunch, we will dive into life cycle management and have some presentations on life cycle management. And after that, we'll have a panel discussion with all of our speakers to, of course, handle any questions, but also just to share some of the views that might not come out in the presentations. So once again, thank you for being here. I would like to start with our first speaker and introduce our first speaker for today. Our first speaker is Prof. Linda Godfrey. I'm just waiting on her profile to be put up. Thank you. She is with the CSIR and also have been working on the waste roadmap for South Africa with the Department of Science and Innovation. I am not going to read through a full profile, but Prof. Godfrey is a principal scientist at the CSIR and extraordinary professor at Northwest University. And as I mentioned, she's been working with the Department of Science and Innovation on the waste roadmap for South Africa and has been doing a lot of great work in the space of circular economy. So I would like to invite Prof. Godfrey and for her first presentation, well, the first presentation that she'll be doing. Please give her a round of applause.
Thanks very much, Lee. Thank you very much, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you here in person this morning. It's my second in-person conference in a week, and it's just so much better than a Zoom screen. So thank you for those that are with us in person and also those that are joining us online. Just remember, up was forward and down. Okay. So the task that Lee gave me this morning was to specifically talk to this issue around South Africa's readiness to adopt circular economy interventions, to transition to a more circular economy. So let me start off. I start every presentation with a slide similar to this one in terms of what the circular economy is not. Because probably one of the biggest misconceptions around the circular economy is that it's about waste management, or it's a synonym for recycling. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Unfortunately, in South Africa, that is still very much the interpretation. We see it used in the context of circular economy and waste management. But so if it's not about waste management, what in fact is the circular economy? Whoops. The circular economy is essentially about sustainable resource management. It aims to decouple economic growth, economic development from resource consumption. And so it really speaks to this issue around how do we use resources more effectively, more efficiently in everything that we do as a country. And in fact, I would argue that the circular economy is actually about national resource security in support of socio-economic development. When I sort of transitioned from the waste space into the circular economy space, one of the first questions that I asked was, has anybody done a study to determine what resources are needed in South Africa to achieve the National Development Plan? And I couldn't find an answer. And I thought, if that's the case, how are we going about our development strategy as a country if we don't know what we have and we don't know what we need? So why should South Africa consider the circular economy? This is a question I get asked very often. People say, this is a global north idea. Why should Africa or South Africa consider transitioning to a circular economy? So we've seen a number of drivers behind this idea of a circular economy transition. The first one, which originated probably a decade or so ago, was very much around this issue of resource demand and resource scarcity. And we saw this in Europe, for example. Where they did this, they said, what resources do we need in the EU region, and what do we have, what do we not have? And they identified at that stage, I think in 2011, it was about 14 critical raw materials that they needed, but they didn't have in the ground in the EU region. The update of that was done in 2020, I think it was, now sits at around 30 critical raw materials. So what are South Africa's critical raw materials? Since then, we've seen the driver shift slightly to the circular economy provides us with a climate mitigation opportunity. And the graph on the right-hand side there actually comes from colleagues at UNIDO that showed that, and this came out of the International Resource Panel, that around 50% of climate impacts, 90% of water stress, and 90% of biodiversity loss comes from the extraction and consumption of resources. So if we can use and manage our resources more effectively, we have an opportunity to address these big global challenges that are facing us. And the third one that we've seen emerge in the last 2 years is that the circular economy provides us with an economic recovery, a post-COVID economic recovery. And I think if South Africa needs anything right now, it needs an economic recovery. If you look at current unemployment rates, if you look at how business is struggling. And later on, I'll touch on this in terms of the opportunity that the circular economy provides for new businesses, for job creation and enterprise development. So where is South Africa currently? So one of the first things that we did between my office and the Department of Science and Innovation was to undertake a study which UCT, the University of Cape Town, did for us in partnership with Boku, Austria, to determine the level of circularity of the South African economy through a material flow analysis. And they showed that South Africa is only 7% circular. It reconfirmed what we knew, that the South African economy is very extractive-based. We've got a very strong mining-based economy. We extract minerals and metals. We export them prior to beneficiation, so we lose those resources from the South African economy. We have very big throughputs of resources. We have very big throughputs in terms of gaseous, liquid, and solid waste generation. The tragic thing is, despite being such a resource-rich country, we actually use very little of our own resources to invest in our own country. So we have very little in terms of stock building. Very little of our resources go into building housing, roads, rail, infrastructure to improve lives, livelihoods, socio-economic development. And a tiny bit that's actually recycled, recirculated back into the South African economy. And so this provides us with a starting point to really reevaluate and rethink how we as a country, first of all, do certain things. So a lot of the top line is around a very fossil fuel-based energy system, how we generate energy, how we use energy, how we use water, how we produce waste, and what we do with those resources at end of life. So where are the circular economy opportunities in South Africa? And again, this was a question that I kept getting asked. And I think, as a scientist myself, I always come from a point of evidence. And so this was an opportunity that the CSR had as a very multidisciplinary organization with, skills from human settlements to mobility to the environment to infrastructure, mining, etc., perfectly positioned to answer this question. So the first question we asked ourselves is, where should South Africa be directing its circular economy efforts? Because it just seems like such a big mammoth task. Where do we start? We're talking about sustainable resource management, but really, at what point within the economy do we actually start to tackle this? So we started to ask ourselves these questions in terms of which sectors have the greatest resource demands, whether it be energy, water, materials. We know the different sectors and their contribution to the South African economy from a GDP's perspective, but what is their resource demand? Also, which sectors are facing resource insecurity? We know, for example, energy insecurity, the impact that it's had on the manufacturing sector, water insecurity on the agriculture sector, but also geographically in terms of regions. We saw the direct impact of the droughts in the Western Cape and still the ongoing droughts in the Eastern Cape that is having on business and on development. So not only from an economic sector perspective, but also from a regional and geographic perspective where we face resource insecurity. And so we started a study looking at these different sectors. First of all, we started with mining, which very often is placed outside of the circular economy, to look at, is resource scarcity a driver for South Africa, despite having a strong mining-based economy? And what are the opportunities for the mining sector? We looked at agriculture. What are the circular economy opportunities in that space? At manufacturing, similarly, human settlements, so our cities and towns are big consumers of resources. We also move a lot of goods and services, from hinterlands through into cities. So we have a lot of transport of resources between places in the country. Mobility, how we move things as well. Most of our products are actually moved by road in South Africa, which is obviously resource intensive. And then we have the cross-cutting issues around energy and water that really speak to all of those. And what we started to see, from literature, from international case studies, was that there are circular economy opportunities in each of these. And actually, by unlocking these opportunities, we have, I'm using opportunities too many times. We have the opportunity to create new businesses, to decouple South Africa's future growth from resource consumption, to address these issues around resource security, improving business efficiency. Resources, as they become more scarce, become more expensive. And so how do we improve the efficiency and competitiveness of business in South Africa? How do we create thriving, resilient cities? We've seen this, for example, in KZN with the recent floods, the devastation that it causes. How do we build more resilient cities to thrive, that we don't necessarily have these kinds of impacts in the future? I'm not going to go into the details of these. I've provided the link at the bottom there. What we did was we created 8 short little think pieces, 4-page briefing notes for each of these different sectors, really just to introduce the reader to what the circular economy opportunity is in that space. There was an overarching one that really provided our position on the circular economy and then going into each of those sectors. And they're a quick sort of 5-10 minute read. And then from that, we said, let's start somewhere. So we started with a deep dive into 3 of the specific sectors, and we're hoping that we'll be able to now continue with that into the 4 remaining ones. But we looked at mining, agriculture, and manufacturing, and that's what I just want to touch on quickly now. Mining, I'm going to, just one slide on that, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the others. So first of all, we asked this question, as I said, is resource scarcity the driver for South Africa to transition to a more circular economy? And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, no, it's not. We've got hundreds of years of resources, we've got an active mining economy. It can't possibly be for South Africa. But it turns out that it is. There are, in fact, 5 minerals and metals that face less than 50 years of economically viable mining remaining in South Africa. And so what happens when we start to run out of those? What are the implications for business, for jobs, for local communities when we no longer have those resources in the ground? The tragic part is that for all 5 of those, more than 90% of those minerals and metals are exported out of South Africa. So we lose our ability to implement circular interventions of being able to, at end of life, recover those minerals and metals and return them back into the productive economy. So there are 3 principles associated with the circular economy. The first principle is to design out waste. The second is to keep materials in use. And the third is around regenerating natural systems. And we found that there are opportunities for the mining sector in all 3 of those. For designing out waste, there is opportunity to redesign mining processes and value chains, and aligned with the conference that we're at now, is really around to improve resource efficiency in the mining sector. In terms of material use, there is opportunity to reduce, reuse, recycle various waste streams, products, equipment at end of life on mines. There's a lot of discussion at mines around how do you deal with these very large mine tires, and a colleague of mine who follows a little later this morning, I think might even touch on that. And then regenerating natural systems. We've seen a lot of the mines transition and adopt renewable energy technologies. I think just recently I saw the first mine in South Africa to have a hydrogen-powered mine vehicle operating on site. How do we restore mining landscapes? So there are a multitude of different circular economy interventions. And what's so great is that so many of the South African mining houses are really now starting to delve into this issue in terms of where they can unlock opportunities for themselves, but also unlock opportunities to their neighboring communities around the mines. Agriculture. Agriculture is a major user of resources in South Africa, the largest user of water in South Africa, for example, considerable use of pesticides, chemicals, energy as well, not only just in terms of growing crops, but also in terms of moving products and services around. And similarly there, under the 3 principles, we found significant opportunity for circular intervention. So through precision farming, again, how do we create more resource-efficient farming practices? How do we irrigate at the right time? How do we monitor climatic conditions, for example, through precision agriculture to make sure we're irrigating when we need to irrigate? How do we adopt more organic fertilizer methods that we're not necessarily applying soils and chemicals to field? Very importantly, how do we actually bring food production closer to the consumer, which then requires less transport and the use of resources in getting food to us? Significant opportunity around the sharing economy. We've seen wonderful examples of agricultural cooperatives in West North Africa that actually provide, through the sharing economy, access to advanced technology in a non-ownership based model. So these cooperatives will, for example, own a harvester, and all the farmer does is similar to Uber. Instead of going on to Uber and booking a ride, they go on and they book a harvester for that 1 week in the year when they need it. And so they don't sit with a harvester and all of the resources attached to that for the remaining weeks of the year when they don't need it. And it's around maximizing the use of those resources. And similarly, why aren't we doing that in South Africa for our small-scale farmers? Providing them with access to better technology through a sharing economy or non-ownership based model. Keeping materials in use, how do we return nutrients to our agricultural system? A lot of work happening already in South Africa around biorefinery, around recovering high-value products from agricultural and agro-processing waste streams. And then regenerating natural systems, so much opportunity in the space. If you look at the damage that some of our large-scale agriculture is having on soils, how do we look at things like crop rotation, intercropping, mixed farming, for example, reduced or zero till, And with that, obviously, comes a need for education awareness around how some of these practices actually start to create a spiral in terms of deteriorating soil quality and then the need to add more fertilizer and more water in future agricultural production. We actually engaged with stakeholders. Sorry, the colors are a bit odd there. We engaged with stakeholders in the sector to look at the readiness then for implementation of these interventions. And what we found is that for certain of them, I think, ideas that have already found traction and adoption in South Africa, there was a higher level of readiness. So we see, for example, things like composting having a higher readiness and a higher level of implementation. We also have some around mixed farming, crop rotation to some degree, agro-processing technologies, but still somewhat on the low side. So there's obviously still a lot of room for improvement around the adoption of these interventions. Whoops. Where did we have low levels of readiness in the agricultural sector? So things, for example, like chemical leasing. This was a very foreign concept to the agricultural sector. And so this is something we also want to explore further in terms of how do we actually provide chemicals in a more sustainable way through a leasing method where you're actually looking at the impact as opposed to the volume that you're selling to a farmer. Also lower levels around digital platforms in agriculture, around equipment sharing. I gave that example a little bit earlier. Aquaponics, aquaculture, lower levels of readiness in that space. So really a lot of opportunity in some of these areas to scale and pilot and demonstrate interventions that we can then take forward. The manufacturing sector. Also a significant user of resources, energy, water, materials. We've heard about that yesterday and this morning already. So how do we redesign our manufacturing processes to improve resource efficiency? How do we adopt advanced processes like additive manufacturing that we know are less resource intensive? How do we look at sharing economy business models? Are there different ways of getting products to consumers in a less resource intensive manner? Keeping materials in reuse, we started to see this appear in South Africa, so remanufacturing. We have examples of businesses down in the Eastern Cape closely aligned with the automotive industry that are doing remanufacturing of end-of-life vehicles or end-of-life engines. And as the rest of the world transitions to electric vehicles, we know that developing countries will lag behind that. It's likely that we'll still be using internal combustion engine vehicles for some time. So how does South Africa position itself to be a world leader in the remanufacturing of internal combustion engine vehicles for this interim period before EV adoption? Is there opportunity in that space as part of the just energy transition where we know certain industries like the automotive industry might be disrupted? And then regenerating natural systems, opportunities around green energy systems, solar, wind, hydrogen. How do we adopt these different energy technologies? And really, at the end of the day, it's around how do we create a more globally competitive manufacturing sector through these different interventions. So I can go on about this forever, so I'm hoping at some point, Lee, you'll tell me to stop. Thank you. Similarly, we engaged with our stakeholders in terms of what is the level of readiness to adopt these interventions. And we found, as with agriculture, some of them that have had traction in South Africa for a few years are well known. There's a sense that we are ready to not only implement, but to scale. Things like, for example, materials looping. That's our traditional recycling. We've seen this for paper and packaging. We've got a long history around recycling of those. Things like resource efficiency and cleaner production. A lot of that awareness might be, for example, driven by the work that NCPC has done in South Africa to improve resource efficiency. Similarly, industrial symbiosis. We've got industrial symbiosis programs, I think, in most of our provinces, if not all of them. So a high level of readiness in that space. Remanufacturing to some degree, renewable energy technologies, absolutely. But equally, there are ones that are perhaps not as well known or slightly foreign to the manufacturing sector. Things, for example, like circular design. So the circular economy really starts with at the earliest point in the value chain with product design. How do we design products for circularity so that at end of first life or second life or third life, they can be dismantled and repaired or remanufactured, or new components or modularity added to that product? Green steel manufacturing. There was a very long debate around green steel manufacturing, and is it part of the circular economy or is it not? Circular business models. We're only starting to see those appear in South Africa. And again, there's this misconception that circular business models are around setting up a buyback center or a MRF to recycle paper and packaging or electronic waste. But there is so much opportunity in Africa, I believe, to get goods and services to consumers in a completely different way, in a way that is not necessarily physical or tangible. So this issue around businesses, I do believe, as I've just said now, that there is business opportunity in this space. There's opportunity for existing businesses to adopt these interventions and with it reduce their resource use to improve their resource security in their value chains. But similarly, there are opportunity for completely new businesses. And I think we haven't even scratched the surface of what that yet is in South Africa or Africa. So in fact, I've provided, there's a link to these two reports here. But the two bullets I wanted to reference there was that circular economy manufacturing was listed number 6 in 12 largest business themes in a world economy heading for the global goals. And secondly, resource recovery and circular models within the 60 biggest market opportunities related to delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. There are a number of businesses that have already made public commitments around adopting, whether it be more circular design or circular economy practices in their value chains. And I do believe that there's opportunity for disruption, and this is both a positive and a negative thing. It's positive for new businesses, for new entrepreneurs, and especially the youth. I believe there's opportunity in this space to start up disruptive businesses. But that provides a risk to established businesses, and I think if established businesses are not seriously considering circular economy interventions, it does place both them and their value chains at risk. So I do believe we're going to see a lot of disruption in this space over the coming years. There were a number of obstacles, though, that were identified by our stakeholders, and these were common to all, whether it be in mining, agriculture, manufacturing, they were seen to be the same. There was a lack of awareness around what the circular economy is and what the circular economy interventions were. Issues around cost and finance was a major obstacle, especially for small businesses, many of them who are just operating in survival mode. They don't have the cash flow or the fluidity to try new things, to experiment in case it goes wrong. So the lack of sustainable financing mechanisms, and that then starts to look at different financing institutions, whether it be government or banks. How do we create sustainable financing mechanisms in the circular economy? Management approval was another one. For many of the people we spoke to, they said it takes just too long to get management approval because perhaps of a lack of awareness around what the opportunity is, a lack of evidence to really be able to show to management these are the benefits if we do this. The lack of skills, lack of knowledge and capacity in circular economy interventions. A really big one was the lack of demonstration projects. For some reason in Africa, we seem to want to touch and feel an example. We want to see it in practice on the ground before we take that chance, before we take that risk, understandably so. And so there was a strong feedback, strong comment from our stakeholders to say we need demonstration projects where people can go to see these things in practice, whether it be regenerative agriculture or precision farming or additive manufacturing. We want to be able to see these in practice. And then lack of an enabling legislative environment. Why should business do this? What is in it for them? Do we have the right incentives, for example? I always prefer the carrot to the stick. So how are we incentivizing business to thrive in this space and to adopt these interventions? I think I've spoken over time because the remote's dead. There we go. Just as well, concluding thoughts. I'm wrapping up, Chair. So let me leave you with these last few comments. The first one, if there's only one message you take away from this today, it's to remember that the circular economy is not about waste management, but it's about sustainable resource management, and that affects every single one of us. The circular economy calls for disruption, and it calls for innovation, and again, that creates opportunity. Transitioning to a circular economy will require a systems approach. Hopefully you've seen that from the previous slides, is that these all interlink. What we do in mobility affects agriculture. What we do in energy affects manufacturing. It's going to require a systems approach, but it also requires a depth of sector and technical expertise, and we need both of those. We need to be investing in skills in both of those areas. It's also going to require interfacing with other supporting disciplines like 4IR. So how do we use sensor technology or robotics or smart materials, for example, in these circular economy interventions? And I think that's an incredibly exciting space and one that we haven't really explored at all in South Africa. And lastly, the circular economy requires a change in mindset about how we view and how we use resources. So think about it in your own business when you go back to office. Think about it in your own home. Do I even think about the resources that I use in terms of production or consumption? And I think that for me is kind of at the forefront of really how we take the circular economy forward. We need to have this change of mindset, and we need to see this change of mindset through all of our line departments, through business, through the business associations as well, that we're approaching this from a sustainable resource perspective. Thank you very much.